Who's your emergency contact? Who should we notify in the case of death? Welcome to the USP, where I spent the last 2+ decades of my life. You know, when I got transferred to Beaumont, I met this dude named Joe Bassa. He's Guamanian out of Guam. And at the time that I met him, he was already in his 60s, and he had like, I don't know, his nerves and stuff were kind of failing him as far as like one of his arms was shaking. Because when I went to Beaumont, I left after getting transferred out of Victorville after stabbing up a dude from Guam. And, I understand that there's dudes that we all consider are from Guam, but are from Saipan, Palau, or some of the other little islands around there. But, when they speak Chamorro, that's the language they speak in Guam, I just think assume they're all Guamanian. And Joe Bassa, he might be Saipan. So don't comment and talk about I got their nationality wrong and all that. But anyway, when I went into the unit, he's one of the only like 9 Asian Islanders that we had on the compound in Beaumont. And he was in my block. So he came and asked me about, hey, why are you here? What happened? This and that. And me being from Utah, there's not a lot of us, especially when I first entered the penitentiary. So anybody that I get into it with is always gonna have homeboys that have already been established and spread out throughout the different penitentiary. The dude I stabbed in Victorville, he had a co-defendant, Grasshopper, in Beaumont, and a couple other Guamanian dudes that was there in Beaumont. So I'm expecting that there's gonna be friction because, if somebody stabbed up my co-defendant, I'm gonna feel some type of way and feel that I wanna avenge my homeboy. So, because I think this way, I'm gonna assume that other people think this way. But fortunately for me, it turned out that the dude that I stabbed up, none of his co-defendant liked him. All his co-defendant told me that he was a rat because I guess their case back in Guam, they had took over the prison and tried to escape. And it turned out that the dude, his name is Giano, the one I stabbed up, told on them, and they all had separate tees on each other where they couldn't be on the same yard. So when I ran into Grasshopper and told him about the incident, he's like, oh man, I don't give a fuck. I'm glad now I can go to the West Coast. Because he'd been stuck out in Beaumont and the East Coast his whole bid, not being able to go over to the West Coast because that dude Yana was on that yard. So going back to this guy named Joe, he was an older dude. And while we were in the conversation, I didn't know he had like some nerve issues or anything. I could see his hand shaking. And I'm thinking in my head, like, man, this dude's about to make a move on me. And I don't want to beat up an old man, you know what I mean? But I will, And I was just like, well, I know if I beat him up too, then now it's going to become a racial thing on the next yard that I go. But he just had a little nerve issue with his hand. He didn't have any intention of bringing me any move or anything. And then getting to know him later on, I kind of felt, I was kind of relieved that me and him never bumped heads because this dude turned out to be a certified, I don't want to say psychopath, but he's, learning about him and learning his case and what brought him to the mainland, you'd have to think that he was a little crazy, right? So I guess back in Guam, they were in the penitentiary, Guam's not a state, but it's a territory of the United States. So the federal government has jurisdiction over them. They have their own penitentiary on that island, but a lot of their stuff can be considered federal too. And a lot of dudes that come from Hawaii and Guam, they might be state prisoners, but because the state deemed them to be too dangerous or to have too much influence on those islands, they contract the feds to house them. So Joe got contracted to the feds because of what he did while they were in the penitentiary in Guam. Him and another guy, I'm not really remember his name, but one of the staff members, I think it was a counselor, had disrespected Joe's homeboy. And they got in their feelings about it, so they decided to kill him. These two dudes went into the counselor's office either with a bread knife or a butter knife, but either or has got those ridges, right? So they went in there and went to work. They say Joe had him around in the neck, holding him down while his homeboy stabbing him to death. And after they stabbed him and killed him, they were trying to saw off his neck with a butter knife. And, you know, from the stories that I've heard from them, they had like, you know, chunks of meat and stuff stuck on the knife because it's a freaking butter knife. You're trying to saw somebody's head off with a butter knife. And then, well, after they killed the dude, somehow a third person that they were involved with that ended up telling on them had access to gasoline. You know, even in the penitentiary, you have access to gasoline for the orderlies that go around mowing the yard and this and that. Or they have machinery that needs gasoline to be powered in the facilities. So somehow they got a hold of gasoline and they doused the counselor's office up and set the place on fire. That's how he ended up in the feds. So again, like, you know, when I had the conversation with him, thinking that he was gonna bring me a move, which he wasn't, I'm glad that, you know, nothing happened because his case shows that he's devious and crazy and is with the fuck. But you know, we have a lot of old Islander homies that been in there for decades already. And when you get to find out about their cases and stuff, some of them are just outrageous, outlandish, unbelievable. I have a few homies that are Filipino that were in the military. And they're in the military and they're in the federal prison. They were in the military prison first, then they got contracted to the federal prison. And all of them are for murder, you know, for killing their sergeant or killing another soldier. Like, you know, being in the war makes you crazy. Or just being on the island makes you crazy. Because there's a lot of dudes that come out from Guam that are in there for bodies. But, you know, I'm not here to judge how they got to the penitentiary because these individuals, even though they have some crazy cases, when I met them, they were always, with me, respectful. And they were men that I became friends with and even have affection for and respected. But regardless of how they look, you never know, you know, what the potential that these individuals have within them. And again, the old man Joe, when I met him, he looked harmless, but he was a cold-blooded killer. Welcome to the USP.